Hey, it's Mike here, and today another video where I respond to a video debunking one of my videos. The original video that I responded to was from the massive YouTube channel What I've Learned. The one that I'll be responding to today that was responding to me, it's a bit confusing, is a somewhat smaller YouTube channel called Plant-Based Poser, a name that we'll unpack in a little bit.
This What I Learned video that is going like wild right now with the vegans.
But my debunk got debunked, so I guess we're debunking a debunk. She goes after my points as well as points made by Ryan of Happy Healthy Vegan. So we're gonna see if I am too dumb to understand the water cycle, as the anti-vegans in the comments have stated.
I don't know, when do you learn about the water cycle? Probably like in grade school, right?
And I also want to keep it fresh, so I will be responding to one of her more recent videos where she's concerned about the quality of B12 in supplements versus animal products. Let's go. And I will say, Julie of Plant-Based Poser doesn't appear to be black and white in terms of diet. She's not like a low carber or a carnivore, despite, the video she made getting a lot of anti-vegan support. People like Vegan Deterioration came out of the woodwork, or meat work, whatever hole they crawl out of. As far as I understand, the name Plant-Based Poser comes from this person being ex-vegan and then being told that they were never really vegan because they went back to eating animals, that they were just plant-based. I don't know the whole story. We're not even here to dig into that. However, it seems they're still quite plant-based in the sense that their most recent video was them making a fruit smoothie. So I'm just happy that they are still eating some degree of plants and that Julie's not just yo-yoing between carnivore and other low-carb diets as some ex-vegans sadly do. So that's great. And just a reminder, while I will be disagreeing on a lot of points in this video, let's try and be respectful in the comments. Because despite her not really having a black and white dietary view, at least at this moment, her video that was responding to me and Ryan really did come off as like classic anti-vegan content. Again, got a lot of anti-vegan support. And it is the case that the original video that she was defending of What I Learned's video did come from a channel that is low carb, high meat, and meat defending, almost anti-vegan in a lot of videos, if you've seen my series of responding to him. And yes, it is the case that Julie's response to me and Ryan and our videos is well over a year old, and I just saw it. Thanks for sending it, person who sent it. But it is the case that all of these points are just as relevant today, if not more relevant. So let's get to the first point, which has to do with cow pee.
The first thing I want to talk about is this cow pee thing. Like, both of them were so kind of like confused or thought it was like hilarious, like talking about the cow pee thing.
And What I've Learned brings on a animal sciences guy, and here's what he says.
Now, the vast majority of water that goes into a beef animal will go into the beef animal in the form of feed, not in the form of water that they drink, in the form of feed. And guess what happens to that water a few hours after it's ingested? It's urinated out. It's not staying in the animal. It stays in the animal as long as the tea that you drank this morning stayed into your body.
Mike kind of laughed at the concept.
And yeah, that is a ridiculous statement, which is why me and Ryan both laughed at it independently. And it is the case that only a small portion of the water that is actually inputted into an animal's feed will then make it to that animal and be peed out, like a tiny fraction. And she admits it's just a fraction, so I don't understand the problem there.
And said not all of the water that goes into a plant will end up in the plant in the end, and he's right.
But then she says that Ryan and I were just completely wrong because if you look closely, it's just talking about rainwater. Here she is.
But Mike, you had to read the fine print. If you look at what they're saying here, a lot of the feed that goes to cows is grown primarily with rainwater.
Okay, just because What I've Learned, this guy adds a text that says rainwater over an interview he did, does not mean that all feed that is inputted to livestock is grown with just rainwater. I don't understand. The animal science guy was pretty clearly saying that when looking at the water footprint of livestock, the vast majority of that is in feed. No, we're really not just using rainwater to feed these animals. Globally, about a third of the planet's freshwater is used on livestock. And that's even worse in the US, as we will cover in a little bit. So very much no, there is not a zero water footprint for animals and livestock in general. And yes, it is completely insane to say that livestock is peeing out a meaningful amount of water in the grand scheme of things when we're talking about all of the irrigation water that is dumped on every field to grow feed. Anybody who waters plants knows that it's a tiny fraction that is actually going to be in that plant, in the leaves of that plant, by the time it's shipped and dried and makes it to those cows. Like, it's actually just completely indefensible and insane. And today's video is sponsored by Seed's DS01 Daily Synbiotic, which is a prebiotic and a probiotic, as well as 53.6 billion active bacterial cell units from 24 different strains, and it's specifically coded so that it can make it down past your stomach to where it needs to be. Why am I trying to make a tiny heart out of seed capsules? Well, that's because it is February, the month of Valentine's Day, so this segment is dedicated to the gut heart axis, the axis of love. While vegans generally do incredibly well in the realm of cholesterol, I have talked to a few people who have trouble getting it lower, and it is the case that there are two strains in Seed's DS01 Daily Synbiotic that are specifically chosen to support cardiovascular health. These strains are L. Plantarum and Bifidobacterium lactis. So let's cover a randomized control trial on L. Plantarum, which is this one, which gave people with slightly high cholesterol that probiotic strain for 12 weeks. And they say, quote, daily ingestion of the active treatment resulted in a statistically significant reduction in LDL, end quote, which is that bad cholesterol. And they also showed a reduction in blood pressure. Incredible stuff. And Lindy and I have been taking Seed's DS01 Daily Synbiotic since October 2021 and have felt digestively great ever since. So if you'd like to support your heart and support other health areas such as dermatological health, gut barrier integrity, and these other ones that are listed, then you can click below and use the code Mike15 at checkout for 15% off your first month's supply. All right. But now let's open it up to the rainwater aspect. Yes, I understand the difference between irrigation and rainwater. And don't even get me started on irrigated pasture, which very much is the thing in the US. She continues.
Okay, so that water goes into the plant. Plants drink what they need. Any excess goes back into the ground, gets evaporated, goes back into the water cycle. Please don't make me bring out the water cycle.
And yes, when it comes to saving the planet per se, we are worried about all of our water-related resources, including land that gets rain, that is naturally irrigated. That has a value. That has a value for producing food for humans, and it'll be less efficient to then throw that food away through the inefficient feed conversion ratios of growing livestock. Yes, the water cycle does recycle and continue. However, our cycle of consumption with billions of people is growing and growing, and we need to keep up with it with our water resources. And if we let things get out of balance, then the system can break down, and that's the issue. I recently did a video on the Colorado River Basin, and it is the case that it's essentially a giant funnel that is supplying water for 40 million people, and all of that flowing water is allocated. It's being used to the point where it sadly doesn't reach the ocean anymore. So rainwater is not just rainwater, it's future irrigation water now. And it's also important to note that a lot of the cattle farming areas in the US, like in the West, for example, are simply too dry to rely on rainwater. So it's just not gonna happen there unless they use some irrigation. No, and this is where we were most water insecure in the US, which brings me to an important quote from the former manager of the Western Water Program at the US Geological Survey, saying that half of the water use in the West is to raise cows, just cows. And that's not even mainly to grow corn and soy for feed. That's the super thirsty pasture crop known as alfalfa. Just watch my video on it if you want to learn more about that. But I also have to reiterate that a ton of other US water resources are just being gulped up. Like 70% of the Ogallala water aquifer use is for livestock. 70% of the Great Salt Lake water is used for livestock, and it is dried up by, again, about 70%. And it's turned into like an arsenic toxic dust cloud situation. I have a whole nother video on that.
And a lot of cow food is grass or like byproducts of different industrial things like oil. Only about 14% of a cow's food is actually edible by humans. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about grass and whatever else they're eating gets peed back out. That's basically like free food.
Now, there's a lot wrong with this chart, and it's kind of to be expected when it's from sacredcow.info. Right off the bat, oilseed cakes, well, they are typically used for livestock and other things. As this study mentions, they do have a nutritional value, and a lot of them are edible to humans. I mean, we're talking about what's left over after peanut oil, for example, which is essentially what they put in that PB2 product I keep seeing on shelves. So right off the bat, the chart is just wrong in its final percentage in terms of human edible material. And then secondly, going to the study that it cites below, you can see what they left out of the chart, and that is that the chart is actually based off weight. So things like grass and leaves, including alfalfa, which is super freaking thirsty, as I previously mentioned, of course, don't have as many calories as, say, grains do, as you can see from this chart, breaking down the calorie content of various feeds. The pie chart is very skewed. As the industry mentioned, it takes about twice as long to grow cattle to slaughter weight when they are fed exclusively on pasture compared to being, finished off in a feedlot. And that has to do with that calorie intake of grain versus these forage crops and grass. And finally, that 86% chunk of unedible food, some of it's waste and stuff, a lot of that is grown on areas that could be used to more efficiently grow crops directly for humans, not lost to the feed conversion ratio. And in that grass chunk, we are talking about deforestation, such as Amazon destruction, of which the leading cause is cattle farming, but cows have no negative effect on the planet. All right, next she goes to debunk a particular point by Ryan that has to do with calories.
Per ton of product, animal products generally have a larger water footprint than crop products. The same is true when we look at the water footprint per calorie. The average water footprint per calorie for beef is 20 times larger than for cereals and starchy foods.
I want to talk about using calories to feed people.
She says that while lentils have a pretty comparable amount of protein to steak, the problem is actually digestibility, and therefore they're like half as good. But she immediately jumps to that protein digestibility score, which I've talked about in detail before. Oftentimes they're measured using raw foods and animals, and it's just not applicable to humans, especially because it's looking at a single food and how complete it would be if that was the only food you were to give humans or an animal. But we actually eat diets of more than one food, and when you eat various plants together in a normal diet, then the amino acid profile evens out and digestibility of diet becomes just fine. And I think that's well illustrated in studies on plant protein in elderly people because their absorbability is lower. From this one, the amount of protein, not whether it was from animals or plants, was what determined muscle mass into older age. And then we also have this study on frailty, which found that plant protein was associated with lower frailty than animal protein, which is pretty cool. And so I do think calories are a relevant metric when looking at emissions. However, if you want to look at protein and emissions, fine, let's look at this Our World in Data chart. And I actually use this chart in my original video, so she's seen it, and you can see that beef is just way up there. And you can see that something like beans is not just 20 times better, but doing the math, 38 times better in terms of emission than beef. Beef is horrible for the environment.
Calories to calories. This is why vegans eat so many calories, is because they can't get the same amount of protein in a piece of meat with lentils without going way over their calories, without eating a ton of calories, like double almost.
Whoa. Is this an accurate claim? Are vegans actually slamming down way more calories than other people? We have to look to the data. This is why it's good to cite stuff. We can look to this 2022 review of 60 studies that included vegans, as well as about 80 others, and they say that the average energy intake was similar across all dietary patterns, including vegans. And if you're like me, you might be surprised that the vegans were even eating as many calories as people who are eating meat. And well, it turns out this is mostly from countries in Europe and Asia. No, they're not eating as much as they are here in the US. And if you've ever spent a couple days on Chronometer, it's clear that a vegan day of eating just various of these plant protein sources that are on trial here, you blast past all of your specific amino acid requirements. So this is just the misapplication of an already myopic protein scoring method. Let's move on. It is the fact that animals eat way too much of our food supply. Globally, we're talking about up to half of the world's grain.
The reason I have issue with this is because in the film By What I Learned, they're talking about cows. And when you quote something like that, you're saying that all this feed is going towards the animals when cows don't actually receive that much feed. They receive about 14% of what they eat is edible to humans. And that's kind of at the end of their life, usually when they're at the feedlot trying to fatten up before slaughter.
And from the industry, cattle double their weight on feedlots, which cannot be understated. And from this study, 99% of US cattle are feedlot finished. This is an entire paper about how going grass-fed would require way more cows. And as you'll see, she is actually advocating to essentially moving the entire world to just eating ruminant meat.
We want more ruminant animals because they make the most sense. They take something like grass that humans can't eat and upcycle it and turn it into protein that humans can't eat. And on land that may or may not be usable by agriculture.
The issues with shifting all meat to grass-fed beef/cows is insane. First of all, we would have to essentially double the population of cows, take all of those feedlot finished cows, and more slowly get them up to slaughter weight, as I previously mentioned. That doubling would mean that we need even more land when we're already using 30% of our ice-free land to raise livestock. So this is getting insane.
Not all animal products are sustainable, and that's why most of us focus on ruminant animals.
And then we have to get to the point which she completely skimmed over, which was a major part of my video, which is the methane emissions from cows. And looking at this chart that I've shown a million times before, grass-fed cows emit over 3 times as much methane as grain-fed cows. So all of a sudden, we're multiplying the environmental impact by several fold. No, that's a climate change death sentence. And I know she said she couldn't cover everything in the beginning of the video, but some points that were really important I made in the video, rapid fire, include that methane is extremely undercounted. First of all, we look at that 100-year time frame compared to CO2, yet at 20 years, it's 86 times as potent as CO2. Then we also have how less than half of CO2 actually makes it up into the atmosphere. Virtually all of methane does, so you can double it once again. This stuff really adds up. Anyway, now that I think I've covered the main environmental points, I could go on forever, but I'll stop there. Let's go to the more recent video, which is titled, Why I Haven't Gone Fully Vegan.
B12s, right? The dose is 1,000 micrograms. Usually, right? 1,000 micrograms you need to take in order to absorb that 1 or 2 micrograms into your body. So it worries me a little, depending on this bottle, for my B12 needs.
So she's saying that supplements must just be a bad source because you have to have so many micrograms, but there's a few things going on here. First of all, this is just overkill that isn't necessary. The biggest piece of evidence showing this is that there was a study done on people who were deficient in B12 were only given 50 micrograms and all of the participants made it out of deficiency. You know, maybe it could have been even lower than 50 micrograms, you know, like it is in a lot of fortified foods if you turn them around. And this is probably for 2 reasons that it's so high. First of all, it's just better to raise your levels faster that way. If somebody is low, you get them out of deficiency faster, just like taking high-dose iron pills. And the second reason is, of course, that it's water soluble. So if you have extra, you can just pee it out. You know, all of this is why my B12 level last time I checked was higher than the average meat-eating person. And also why more recent studies are every single time I've seen showing that vegans don't have a higher B12 deficiency rate, even including ones looking at all sorts of crazy B12 markers most people aren't even aware of. it's getting the job done. And again, a lot of that might just be from fortified foods that have just a few micrograms of B12 in them, who knows? Point is, I really don't think that B12 supplements are inferior, they're actually superior, and I don't think this is an issue that should keep people from going vegan anyway. In the end, livestock is using a lot of water, which is really important for the survivability of the planet. Again, globally 30%. In the US, probably about 50%, and certain really important water resources, between, again, 50 to 70% of that water is going toward livestock, drinking those aquifers and those reservoirs really way down. So yes, I do understand the life cycle of water, and that guy's pee claim was completely ridiculous. Also, just in terms of the sacred cow chart she showed, again, that was by weight, doesn't give the actual representation of how feed would be turned into, final animal weight, or animal muscle that people eat. So it still stands that we use half of the planet's grain and just a crap ton of the planet's land to grow livestock, which is an inefficient use and throws away a lot of our resources, gives us less to deal with when fighting increasing amounts of climate change. Eating less meat will seriously help the planet. What I've learned has still been debunked. The debunk has been debunked to the debunk. Debunked cubed? Maybe even if you count what I've learned's original video as a debunk, that's debunk to the 4th power. Anyway, jokes aside, I hope that these points came across. I do think they are important ones. I'm happy to have this discussion. And of course, if you would like to try Seed's DS01 Daily Synbiotic, click that link below, Mike15 at checkout for 15% off your first month supply. Let me know down below what you think about all of this. If I missed points, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.